Hi, this is Kathy Corridon, author of the Can Do Chronicles and the Can Do blog. Welcome to Live Your Can Do Life, the online workshop series. For the next 2 weeks, I'm hoping that you will go on a very fulfilling journey to discover the places in your life where you kind of get in your own way. I know I did. Where life gets in the way, it's easy to do. And where you lose track of where you want to go and what's important in your life way too easily. And so these 2 weeks are a period of time to begin to sort that out and to find some new strategies and then implement them to be able to live a can-do life, a life based on possibilities and hope, rather than on circumstances and whatever comes down the pike. I want to spend a little time introducing you to the can-do life concepts. Then we will talk about how to best use the format of the online workshop series. It's a little bit different if you're not used to it, and I have some recommendations and ideas for you to try to make it a better and more rewarding use of your time and your investment in yourself. And then I'm going to talk in this first video a lot more about aligning dreams and goals and values so that you're working in the same direction in all areas of your life. And underlying that, I'm going to talk about gratitude. It's one of my very favorite things. So let's get going. What is this can-do life that I keep talking about? A can-do life is a place where every day I make a commitment to having a positive attitude, grounded in gratitude and based in reality. Sounds so easy? It can be easier than the alternative, but it's not easy. And what I've found is that most things in life that are important just aren't that easy. They require the investment of my commitment to continue to grow. And that's what a can-do life is about. It's about growing and discovering more every day, not just about myself, but also about the world around me and how my relationship in that world finds the most meaning, has the most value, and makes the biggest impact. So that's, for me, the core of the can-do life. I know that many of you may have read my book and may have heard from my other videos the story about how I didn't discover the can-do life, but how I came to discover my own can-do approach. But I want to share it just very briefly because sharing stories, I think, is one of the best ways for us to learn. I wasn't always a can-do person. In fact, I had a pretty big chip on my shoulder, and I think if people 5 or 8 years ago described me, it might be she has a really good approach until things go bad, and then she gets pretty defensive. And that chip on my shoulder was, yeah, okay, come on, let's do it my way. If you want to get into it with me, go ahead, knock the chip off my shoulder. Well, things will be fine as long as they're going my way. I had a great life, and I don't want to minimize that. I had wonderful jobs. I worked with a lot of phenomenal people. I think I made an impact, but I didn't make the impact that I could have. And that's what I discovered, and I didn't discover it in this moment of a fairy tale kind of all things came together. I discovered it in a moment of nightmare, everything falls apart. I had some major health issues. I am 2 years into remission from chronic lymphocytic leukemia. I was 8 years after I was diagnosed before I was treated, because with CLL, the treatment needs to be done at an opportune moment where the bang is worth the buck. And for me, it was 8 years of on and off symptoms and better and worse feeling. And I did fine most of the time for the first 6.5 of those years. But then in 2010, it began to change, and I began to have more of my life interfered with symptoms and issues related to having leukemia than not. And I made the decision, a very difficult decision, to quit my day job. It was too demanding. I was too tired. I was way too susceptible to infections. And I worked as the CEO of a youth-serving nonprofit. I was around kids all the time who were little germ factories. And I kept getting all of these just little pesky but chronic kinds of infections. And my fatigue level was very high. So to be able to be present to the community in the way that a leader in that kind of a community position is, it just became too much for me. My husband and I made a very difficult decision along with my doctors that it was time for me to work from home and to do things that weren't putting me at such a high risk and putting my health at such a high risk. So I made the decision and I resigned, gave the organization 4 months to hire someone else, and they did. They hired my successor. And 2 weeks before my last day, my husband's job was eliminated. And so we went from a planned downsizing and restructuring into a major crisis within a half an hour's period of time. We made a decision in those moments that we weren't going to look back. We weren't going to spend time being frustrated or angry or indignant or any of those other feelings that come up at that time, but that we needed to just rally our resources, know what resources we had, keep that in mind, and move it forward. And we did, and I won't go into the details of it, but we did a good job. But the story is that it didn't end just in that moment. Yes, my husband got another job, but it wasn't a good one, and it didn't work out. And we ended up moving partway across the country in order for him to be in a job market that was much more suited to his skills. And we moved and lost a lot of money in selling our house and started all over again. I continued to work, but the arthritis in my hip really took its toll, and it was a total surprise. It was something that came on very suddenly. And so in order for me to get any exercise at all and to fight infections with the CLL, I had my hip replaced. And then over time, worked with my doctor to make the decision to have chemo, to have treatment for my CLL. My husband's job, after I had treatment, it was eliminated again. What are the odds? And he works in the nonprofit sector, and so difficult times in the nonprofit sector, what they do to make it work and to reduce the expenses is they eliminate positions, and he just happened to be in that position a couple of times. And so we've started over probably 1,317 times. But we've started over with a can-do attitude and being able to frame life in a way where we focused with a positive attitude, grounded in gratitude, and based in reality was much easier than feeling sorry for ourselves and looking at everything that had gone wrong and who was to blame and how could we try to get them back. And we live in a culture where that blame game, negative, zero-sum thinking is so pervasive. I live in Washington, D.C., so there's a real major case of it all over the news every single day. And one of the things about a can-do life is it goes against that grain. When I was going through chemo, I blogged at least once a week, and I shared with folks how I was doing and how I continued to work so hard to keep what I called a song in my heart while I felt like I'd been run over by a truck. And it's not easy to do, but it makes a real difference because the amount of support that I got and my openness to receiving that support was very different than it had been at other times in my life. Making a commitment every day to have a positive attitude that is grounded in gratitude, knowing what I am thankful for in my life, and based in reality. It's not a fairy tale. It's not a bunch of precious moments figurines and a a veneer of everything's going to be okay. It's knowing that I need to find within my life, within myself, within my community, the resources to get me through to the next page, to the next place, to the next landmark on my journey. In a whole and healthy, with a good attitude that attracts the people that I need to have support me. So that's my definition of living a can-do life. There are good moments that I have had. There have been wonderful moments that have been almost fairy tale moments. But there have also been some extremely difficult moments. I've had to stand up, dust off my butt, and find a new way to keep on going and make different kinds of decisions and move life a little differently for myself. It's made all the difference in the world. And you know what? I won't go back to any other kind of worldview but a can-do worldview. A can-do life model for me, and I've struggled with how to best describe it and define it, but I call it my can-do worldview. And it has 4 parts. The 4 parts are alignment, making sure that when I'm working towards my goals, that those goals are attached to my dreams, not just to what I want to have happen this week. What's the bigger picture? And what resources do I need to get myself there? And is that bigger picture part of all of who I want to be, physically, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually? How does it wrap around my values? And how does it take me there? We're going to explore that in a lot more depth in a few minutes. The second piece is, how do I make decisions? You know, I made job decisions for a number of years based on what I didn't like in the previous job. Okay? So I had a job, and the certain people in the different parts of the management were not aligned with what I'd been hired to do. And so I went into the next job looking to make sure about how the managers aligned, but I wasn't looking at who the people I would be serving would be. And so I wasn't looking at the whole. I was taking these next steps of not wanting to have a negative outcome, instead of looking at what the possibilities were, how those possibilities fit with what my goals and plans were, and what my strengths are, and moving in a growth pattern instead of in this zigzag pattern of, well, I don't want that to happen again. So the second part is, how do we make decisions? And in the course of developing the can-do model, I came up with 3 questions, and I'll preview those for you now. The first question is, what can I do? Well, that's seems an obvious question, but I think that we only take what we've had options of before. We don't look at what other possibilities are. So I have a second question. So what else can I do? That second question helps me always begin to get a plan B in place, or a modification, or a slight revision to what I'm doing, so that if it doesn't go quite right, I don't have to look very far to get more resources to keep me going in a forward direction. Third question. So just because I can, is it what I want to do? Is it the best decision? Is the timing right? And we're going to go through a lot of discussion about that on the tele-workshop, the tele-seminar that's coming up in the middle of the workshop series. And I want you to be thinking about, as we get ready for that, how do you make decisions? Is it the lesser of 2 evils? Is it based on what I can see right in front of me? Is it because it won't cause a lot of ripples and it's what everybody else is doing? I think there's a lot of ways we make decisions that we end up in can't do situations. The third area is how we deal with change and how change is connected to our growth. There are so many places where we fight and resist making change. And I think the best kind of change we make is gradual change. But when we resist change and we find ways to do workarounds to not have to make the change, kick the can down the street just a little bit farther so I don't have to deal with it, that we find ourselves in situations where the risk of failure is much higher. So I look at change as being part of growth. And E. Cummings said, it takes real courage to grow up and be who you really are. And so it takes real courage to deal with change in a way that allows you to grow up and become who you really are. The fourth practice of a can-do life is creating and then simmering and adding to all the time your secret sauce. I guess secret sauce has become quite the term recently. I thought that I had kind of pulled it out of the air, and then people have said to me, no, I've been reading about that a lot. So I guess I just heard it without hearing it and came up with it as the fourth element. But I think it's really important, and the way I look at secret sauce is, what are those things about you, about me, that make us special, that make us stronger, that make us more connected to the world and able to make a difference in our lives and our families' lives, in whatever our community is, for each of us that's different, but make that difference in the world. The secret sauce. And if we're not paying attention to it, nobody will. So those are the four elements of the can-do life: alignment, decisions, change and growth, and the secret sauce. And we'll be unpacking that as we go. A little bit about how we do with the online workshop series, because it's a little strange not to be sitting in a room with you, being able to have eye contact and know when you have something isn't quite clicking, and being able to ask me a question, let me go back over it. So, and for you to be able to just have this little talking head makes it challenging to work well in this situation. So let me give you some of my best recommendations for making the best of the workshop. The first is to use your workbook. I've set it up so that you can write on it, but I would also strongly recommend that you get, and it doesn't have to be expensive, I have composition books. I have probably 4 dozen of them sitting on a shelf that go back years. I put, as you can see, a little reminder about what I think is important as a picture on the front. But I have notes in, and I have 4 or 5 of these going at any given time for different projects that I'm working on. The one I showed you is my work one that has, I take notes when I'm having phone conversations, and I take notes when I'm in meetings, and I take notes when I'm reviewing something and want to go back to it so that I can track what I've done, because I have a variety of clients and I need to be able to switch back and forth with the ability to remember detail. But I also have a journal that I use that's a personal journal, excuse me, and I have one that I have used over time that builds this workshop series and the books that I have written and I'm writing on the can-do model, so that I can jot down and not have to hang on to all of those things that are important when I'm working on something else, and I always have them to go back to. So I recommend the book, a journal book, for you very highly. One of the things I think is really cool, Leonardo da Vinci kept notebooks his entire life, and he kept them somewhat the way I keep the work one, which is with, not only do I have the work stuff that's going on with my clients, but I also have, my sister called, and right now, very sadly, my father passed away last summer, and so I'm working with her to support her in closing the estate, so that I have the notes from that in there as well. And I have notes about projects that my husband and I are working on around the house. I keep it all in one place, and Leonardo did that. He had everything from creating engineering marvels that were centuries ahead of his time, and he had notes from a friend about a conversation with a friend that had to do with where he lived in several different courts in medieval times. So in the Renaissance, he was the resident artist and resident engineer in these family dynasties. And so he would have notes about that in there as well. I think a notebook is the key for me to keeping that investment in ourselves and keeping things in alignment. I'm going to keep these videos on YouTube and available to people that have the link to get them, at least until 6 to 8 months from the time you take the workshop. I think it's important to be able to go back and listen to something again, to revisit what it was that triggered a certain idea for you to move it forward. And so the 2 videos and the audio recording from the teleseminar will be available to you for months to come. The workbook is there for you to use, and I have put it together as it follows the workshop outline, and then it ends with, well, 2 things. One, it ends with creating your own personal action plan. I use 100 days because I think there's a little bit of magic in 100 days. If we're able to stick with something for 100 days, we can work with it for the rest of our lives. It becomes a habit. It becomes part of who we are. The other thing is that on the last page, I have included some resources. I would very strongly suggest that you utilize those resources. Several of them are within the Can Do blog and within my consulting webpage, where I keep resources for all of my clients and all the people that follow the Can Do blog and the Can Do model. But some of them are books that I've read that have been very insightful for me to be able to understand why some of the things that I do work and why some of the things I've tried to do just don't work. And so I'm one of those people that likes to learn from other people's experience, and I'd like to give you that option as well. So without further ado, I want to cover the first 2 parts of the Can Do model for you. It's part 1 and part 1A. Part 1 is alignment. Now, you've had the worksheet for a while on your dreams. I think that our busy world and all of the demands on our time and attention oftentimes move us away from our dreams. They get us so focused on making sure we get everything done today that we don't forget to do something that's important, that we're able to handle all the responsibilities that we have as a parent, as an employee, as a growing young adult, as someone who is looking to get an advancement in our job, that we're so focused on those little details that we sometimes lose focus on our dreams. Now, I don't think all of our dreams come true, but you know what? None of them will, unless we make a commitment to defining them, spending time with them, understanding which ones are really the most important ones for us. If my dream is to become an author and I don't take the time to write, I don't think it was that important of a dream. It's also not true. I take the time to write. If my passion is in traveling and I don't get outside, I live in the DC area, I don't get outside the Beltway, that's not traveling. I need to find the ways to make that happen. I need to find the people and the resources. I need to save the money. If my passion is to sell real estate, but I don't do anything, and maybe I go to open houses every Sunday in my area, and I really get excited about it, but then I've never looked to find out what are the requirements to become a realtor in the state of Virginia. I don't talk to the realtor about, geez, what are the best things that you like and the hardest challenges that you have in your job? So what are the dreams that we have? And I think I've shared a couple of mine with you in the course of those examples. But what are the things that are the really big dreams? And then what are the ones that we can actually pursue? Once we've made that process come alive, and it's a process, there's no one day we ask the question and the next day we have the answer. It's an unfolding that happens in our life. Then we need to set goals that get us to our dreams, or at least get us to points where we can make decisions about whether those dreams are actually something that we can pursue. There are goals, and I think the example that I use in the workbook, there's the goal of going to New York City. You know what? It's a big place. But until we get there, we can't get to the next level. We can't get to Rockefeller Center, or we can't get to Central Park, or we can't get to Yankee Stadium until we get to New York. So, and then if we're going to go to New York and we want to go to a Broadway show, to a restaurant someone has recommended, or God help you, to a Yankees game. Sorry, I'm a Red Sox fan. That you can't say you want to go to a Broadway play, but not get to New York and not get to the Great White Way. There are those big goals, and then you break them down into actions that help us get to those goals. So I want you to spend at least 10 minutes, and it doesn't sound like much, but it's hard to take 10 minutes. Prefer you spend half an hour every day for these next 2 weeks, and go back and start at the beginning of each and look at what your goals are, and look at how you're getting information to help inform whether those goals really work for you or not. And you start with the big goals, what Stephen Covey calls wildly important goals, and what Jim Collins calls big, hairy, audacious goals, whatever your view of that is. So it would be going back to school. It would be getting a brand new job. It would be changing fields. It might be getting married or buying a house. Those are the kinds of big goals I'm talking about. They go 2 to 4 years of time. What are those goals for you? It's going to be dependent upon what your age is. I'm beginning to look at what the semi-retirement goals are, because that's what my age is. So what are those goals? Define them. Write about them. Be very specific. In 3 years, you want to be in a college program and almost finished with it, so that you can then line up to be able to apply to graduate school or to law school, or to get a job at a certain place with a certain set of financial goals or family goals attached to it. The next is break it down a little bit farther. What do you have to do in the next 12 months to make those dreams come true, to make those bigger goals help make those dreams come true? So if you want to go back to school, I would suggest that you select some courses, talk to the registrar, and get yourself in school. Because until you do that, you have ideas. You don't have goals. You can have a lot of good ideas, and then time passes by and other competing priorities take place, and you don't get there. You have to have those goals, and then you have to have the action plans to be able to make those goals become reality. And then break it down into month, and then break it down into week. And use your calendar to plan the week to move yourself closer towards the goals. There's 2 other things I would suggest that you do. The first is find a way to create a scoreboard of some kind, if you will, to keep track of where you are with your goals. So if your goal is to go back to school, and that you have a timeline of 2 months to discover what resources you need financially to make sure that you have all that in line, to know what courses are available and where you sign up, that you have a way to track and check off. And I use a whiteboard with big red erasable marker. It's erasable because it's a whiteboard, but it's a big red marker. And when I get one of those little goals met, I check it off or put a big red line through it, because it allows me to know I've taken the next step. And then, and I would suggest this be once a month, you set an appointment with yourself, you put it on your calendar, and you sit down and look at where you are, and then move yourself out the next month to make sure that you're moving along and that you can, that scoreboard is helping you get the information. Do you need to make a little bit of a change in it? Do you need to bring somebody else into the conversation? What are the things that you have to do? But unless you sit down and figure out, take a check about where you are, you're not going to get to where you want to go. I use a little, keeping with the travel, it's one of my things, it's one of my dreams, is unless you stop at a gas station and get gas, I mean, your gas tank indicator is your scoreboard on some levels. And unless you stop and get gas and check the map to make sure that you really are on the New Jersey Turnpike, you can end up getting very lost and end up in Ohio. So that's where that taking the time and making sure that you're keeping score, knowing what you need and how far you've come. And then the second part is making sure that you have what you need to take the rest of the trip. We're going to talk a little bit more when we talk about change in the second video about how to use a model of change that's small steps. It's called Plan, Do, Study, Act. Plan, Do, Study, Act. You plan, you try it, you look at what's happened, and then you take the next action. It's a great model. It's a small model of change. But what I'm saying about setting your goals, because if you're going to be making changes, it's going to be in line with what the goals are, to begin to pull some of that thought together. And you can look at it a little bit in your workbook if you want. So that's where I am with goals. And I can't get any more specific than that because each of you is so different. But that you break it down, you keep track of what you're doing, you get your lessons learned and plug it in at a checkpoint. And you may be able to do more than you thought you could. And that's always the good news. And that when you get to the point where you can either cross it off or put a big checkpoint next to it, give yourself the opportunity to do a little bit of a happy dance and celebrate. The last section of this first video is about gratitude. And gratitude is one of my very favorite subjects. You'll see in the workbook that I have actually quoted from Robert Emmons' book on gratitude. There's neuroscience behind how gratitude makes your life different. I had Kathy science behind kind of the evolution of the can-do model during that really rough 3-year period of my life, because I kept saying the things that I was grateful for, the people I was grateful for, the opportunities I was grateful for. When I sent out the information and the newsletter to or email to my family about my decision to go into chemo, I said, I've got a great opportunity to have poison put through my veins for 6 months, but I had a great opportunity because I've just come through my 2-year checkup and I am in remission for a full 2 years. There is no chronic lymphocytic leukemia in my bloodstream right now. There's always that risk for me down the road, and I have to take really good care of myself. But it was an opportunity, and I took it as such. And so when I got sick when I was on chemo, it didn't bother me as much because I knew I was getting better. And I knew that I had to be really grateful that I had the flexible job, because I had quit my day job and was working part-time as a contractor, doing grant writing and organizational development. And I could flex that around and be able to write on Sunday night at 10 o'clock when I felt good, and I didn't have to be anywhere Monday morning at 9 o'clock. I looked at all the things that were working for me, and I believe that over the period of time that I have used this model of making a commitment every day, and sometimes more than once a day, to having a positive attitude grounded in gratitude and based in reality, has changed the way my brain works. And I don't feel right when I get grouchy anymore. I don't feel right when I begin to get defensive. And those are triggers to me, not to get angrier with what's going on and not to dig my heels in farther, but to take a step back and to look at what's going on. Gratitude gives options and perspective. It keeps me out of just my own bubble about how the world is doing me wrong and all of the country western sad songs that I could sing about, all the things in my life that have not gone smoothly, and there are thousands of them. But I also know that I have great friends. I have access to resources within myself and my community that I can ask people for their input. I can share what I'm doing and hear back from people whether or not I'm on the right path or I need to shift it a little bit. I know what resources I have, and I am grateful for every one of them. In the workbook, I give you the recommendation, and it's a strong recommendation, to keep a gratitude journal and to write down every day, and you can talk about it as well. My husband and I have a dinner table ritual where we talk about the things we're grateful for during the course of the day. But here, it's a matter of writing it down. And you have to write 3 things every day, and only one of them can be a rerun. And so, over the course of several weeks, if you do this for 2 weeks, which is 14 days, you will end up with at least 28 new things that you have to be grateful for. And I don't think it's a good idea to get it into being competitive about it, but rather to get it to being looking deeper and seeing the network that opens up to you about what other things you have to be grateful for that you may not have seen as resources and blessings in your life before. Cicero says that gratitude is not just the greatest of virtues, but the parent of all others. And Ignatius says that ingratitude is the root of all sin. Gratitude is very core. If you look around on the media and in other places of our culture, it isn't very prevalent unless you're looking for it. And the neat thing about gratitude is once you change your perspective and you look in the world to find the things to be grateful for, those things that are hassles and stresses in your way don't get the attention that they used to. The things that get your attention are the people and opportunities and places that you have to be grateful for. And then, like I said, your brain becomes accustomed to looking for that. It builds resilience. And so when the stresses and hard times come, they don't take the toll that they used to take on me. And I'm grateful for that. And it comes around and fills in the circle. So I really suggest that you get Robert Emmons' book, Gratitude Works, a 21-day program for creating emotional prosperity, and that you begin to look for places that reinforce and give you gratitude messages every day. I think that you will find, and there's some in the back of the workbook, but I think that you will find that it's a lot closer than you thought it was. And the smile on your face will be a lot quicker to be found from inside of you than it had been before. The other thing that I think is a really good idea as I close up is to look for gratitude role models. I did this when I wrote the Can Do Chronicles, and I found 3 people in my life, from very different places in my life, that really inspired me because of the way they handled and had can do life, and how they handled really difficult things with grace and gratitude. And if you can think about those people, and then if you're comfortable with it, to go just sit down and talk to them, go invite them out to coffee, or get a phone call, not an email, but a phone call, and say, this is one of the things that I see in you and I admire in you. And I'd like to just ask you, how do you do it? What motivates you? What keeps you going? What can you teach me? I think that it allows us to reach out and to build those kinds of relationships that tend to strengthen our network and bring our can-do life just one more step closer to being something that's just part of our life every day. So, it's time to close this video. I want you to start thinking about decisions, because that's on the agenda for next time. Think back to some of the worst decisions you've made. For me, that doesn't take a lot of thought. Although now that I look at decisions in a different kind of way, those, oh my God, mistakes in my life are way farther away from me and don't haunt me nearly as much. But I do know that possibility decision making keeps us from going in circles and hitting dead ends. And that's part of really working toward and finding the resources that you need to live your can-do life a little bit more every single day. It's a journey that is really worth it. I'm glad that you have chosen to take it with me, and I look forward to talking to you on the teleseminar coming up. Thanks.